Hey there, C-Sharpers. My name is Matthew. I'm the C-Sharp Artisan, and this is the second video in my series on human factors. And this one is called The Anatomy of a Mistake. So, have you ever made a mistake? Like in your professional life as a programmer? I sure have. I have made some doozies. Here, let me tell you about one that was pretty recent. This is about 2 months ago. We had just finished a very large data load of about 15 years of historical data, and I realized that there were some problems in the import. And we didn't have time to redo the import. We were going to have to fix it up. So there I was with SQL Management Studio connected to the Azure SQL database, looking around, and I developed this clever update statement. And as soon as I pressed F5, I realized that it was wrong. And it was out there updating about 100,000 records in the wrong way, and in a way that was going to be very difficult to recover from because I was changing foreign key values that were part of the where clause. So it was a pretty bad mistake. Now we'll come back to that in a sec, but the question is, how did that mistake happen? Now, it's a kind of a cliche. Everyone says, well, you got to learn from your mistakes, learn from your mistakes. Sure, but how do you learn from your mistakes? What does that actually look like? And this video series is on human factors, and my proposition to you, my idea here is that most mistakes, if you dig down deep enough, have some psychological roots, that you can identify mental patterns, psychological patterns and habits and processes that ultimately are the root cause of mistakes. So let's analyze my mistake. Let's go through it and see what the heck happened and how did I get to that point of screwing up 100,000 records. So the first thing I know when I think back on that is fatigue was a big part of the problem. At the time that this happened, I was really tired. I had been grinding on this project, on the import routine, and I honestly had put in a couple of true 14-hour days, by which I mean I almost didn't leave my chair for 14 hours at a stretch programming. I was probably only getting 4 hours of sleep. I was really leaning in hard, and I was extremely tired, and as we all know, tired is stupid. So fatigue was definitely a part of why that happened. But why was I so tired? How did I get into that situation? We have to dig deeper. So there was a pretty hard deadline. We were under deadline pressure, and this really just had to get done. It was going to be a very challenging conversation to explain to anybody why we missed the deadline. So this kind of deadline pressure was driving things. But again, you have to ask, well, how did I, back myself into a corner like that? Why were we under such deadline pressure? And, backing up in the chain of events, if I look back, I can see honestly, there was some poor planning that happened months prior to this. Some poor resource allocation. The team we had assigned, their skill set, if I'm honest, didn't totally match all of the work we needed to do. And this part of the problem we had kind of underestimated a little bit. So there was some poor planning that happened early on that kind of contributed to this snowball where we were backed into a corner. So again, why? What led to the poor planning? What led to the bad estimation and the overpromising and the not ideal resource allocation that happened? And now we finally get to some of the psychological factors. And I'm talking here about psychological factors in my own head. I'm not blaming anyone else for any of this. I am owning my own habits and tendencies, my own psychology. So I have a theory about programmers. I think a lot of us are optimists. And I think a lot of us are people pleasers. We like to write good code and get a nice pat on the head and be told, good boy, that's great, thank you. And that's what drives us, is a desire to do things. And also, many of us are pretty confident. We've gotten into this profession and excelled because we're good at problem solving and we believe in our own abilities. So none of these are bad traits. There's nothing wrong with being an optimist. There's nothing wrong with being confident. There's nothing wrong with wanting to please people. Those are all great. That leads to a wonderful, I can do that attitude, which everyone loves and which is really helpful. But there is a downside to the I can do that attitude. And that is when you overpromise, when you kind of shortchange your planning and estimation and you don't realize how hard something really might be. And in this case, I looked at the poor resource allocation at the team and I was like, they're going to do okay, but I'll be the backstop. If things go a little sideways, pretty sure I can take care of it. So in a way, I made my own bed and then I had to lie in it because sure enough, the rest of the team kind of wasn't able to really level up quite enough. Again, that's not a criticism to them. It's just the reality of where we were at. I had to step in to try to be the superhero. It was a lot more than I had counted on, and therefore we had this snowball. Several days in a row, almost a week of just absolutely leaning in as hard as I could, working myself into a corner, getting exhausted, backing myself up against this terrible deadline, and then at about 1 a.m, pressing F5 when I really shouldn't have. So that's the deeper psychological analysis. And once you kind of understand your own habits and tendencies and proclivities and desires, you can take steps then to prevent them, and you can, or at least kind of temper them. So then you can truly learn from your mistakes. And for me, the lessons would be, don't overpromise. Don't, fall back on your own confidence in cases where it, can cause a problem. Learn to temper that kind of I can do that attitude with proper management, proper planning, proper resource allocation, and clear communication with the customer. And ultimately be willing to admit when things are going sideways and you're going to miss the deadline. That might not have been a bad move either. It would have been painful and had consequences, but we would have avoided the mistake. Now, at the end of the day, in this particular case, things worked out. I had to spend another hour kind of clawing and scratching and thinking through how I was going to reverse the horrible SQL statement, and I did. And ultimately, we nailed the deadline, and I paid the price mentally and physically, but, we got the thing over the line. So nothing fell out of the sky. No one died. But it was a bad mistake that could have been avoided. Now, in closing, I want to give a special message here to the managers and team leads out there. How do you respond when one of your people, one of your team members makes a mistake? Because that's going to happen too. So the first thing that I would encourage you to do is not to punish mistakes. Now, of course, if somebody is a repeat offender and they keep making the same mistakes over and over, and they're just really not cut out for the job for whatever reason, then yeah, they probably need to go make other plans, and it's time for some disciplinary action. I'm not saying that's never right. But in most cases, or at least many cases, if you punish a mistake, the first thing that's going to happen is people will start covering up their mistakes. They will hide them from you. And this is even worse, because at least you can fix and address and learn from a known mistake. A cover-up is a total disaster. So as part of your open door policy, you want to make sure people know if they reveal a mistake to you, they're not going to get kicked. And then the second thing is, people don't do this psychological analysis naturally. So you, as the manager or team lead, you have to encourage them and challenge them and teach them how to do it. So let me give you a real world example from my life. Years ago, I was a field service engineer, and we worked on physical machines in the biotech industry, installing and repairing these multi-$100,000 research equipment boxes. And one day I was working on one, and it's kind of a long story, but basically with a simple slip of my hand, I destroyed a $2,200 part. And it was a pretty expensive mistake, and there were a lot of things that went into that. But I had had that experience of having a boss, a manager, who when I brought it to their attention did not overreact and did not punish me, but helped me think through, well, Matthew, what led up to that? And then I was able to pay that forward several years later when I was the team lead. And one of my people was up in the Pacific Northwest, and he made a mistake during a repair and destroyed an $8,000 flow cell on one of these machines. And he was terrified about bringing this to my attention. But when he did, I was like, okay, look, that's not great, but first thing, change your travel plans. You're going to have to stay in Seattle probably 2 more nights, and let your other customers know you're going to be late. You're going to reschedule them. Second, we'll overnight you a part right now. You should get it tomorrow. And you need to reset expectations with the customer that there's going to be a delay, but it's all going to be okay. So don't worry about any of that. The only thing I ask of you is that you think through what led up to that. What is it in your work practice, your habits, your professional life, how you're dealing with things that led you to a situation where you could destroy an $8,000 part? And a couple weeks later, we talked about it, and he came back to me with a really great analysis. And he said, well, honestly, it was an internally imposed deadline. I just had this idea that I needed to be out of there by 5 because I needed to get to the hotel, because I needed to get a good night's sleep, because I had an early flight to get to the next customer. There was kind of this chain of pressures. And we talked about how one can stay more rested and refreshed while traveling. Being a road warrior is difficult. We talked about travel planning and scheduling and making sure that he didn't back-to-back himself too much and that, we left a little room. And ultimately, that even when things started to take longer, he had to talk to himself and be like, this isn't going like I liked. I'm probably not going to get it done by 5. Maybe I'm not going to get back to the hotel on time. Maybe this will spill over to tomorrow. But ultimately, the key was managing his own kind of internally created pressure, his own psychological pressure to get out the door by 5. That was the driver in the sloppy mistake. So that's my take on how you truly learn from your mistakes. You have to pay attention, not just to the external factors like a lot of work to do and tough deadlines and challenging technical situations, but you have to pay attention to the internal factors as well. What is going on in your own mind? That you can control, and that can help you avoid mistakes. Hey there, C# friends. Are you enjoying these videos and finding them helpful? I hope so. And if you are, please go ahead and like the video on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and feel free to leave a comment. I would love to hear from you.